Hello, All Saints family. My name is Matthew Roberts. I'm a member of the church, and I also teach Sunday school. A while back, Pastor Kristen asked me to share a little bit about my faith with the church. This was originally intended to be a part of the Lenten Wednesday worship services. However, plans have changed, obviously. On that note, I do hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. So in order to understand kind of where my faith is, you have to understand a little bit about where it was and where I've been. Growing up, I was an Air Force brat. My father worked with the nuclear arsenal, so I pretty much stayed in one of two places. However, the people I hung out with, my friends, my neighbors, as it were prone to change very frequently and without notice. So I quickly learned that picking friends based on things like race or religion or class or any of the kind of things that right now I feel like we often use against people, even though there's no real reason to, wasn't a luxury that I could have. If I did that, I would have no friends for months, years at a time. At the time, we were practicing Lutherans, kind of. We were CEOs, Christmas, Easter, and other holidays, and really and truly, it was mostly just Christmas. But that is what it is. So didn't have a ton of biblical influences growing up. Started to get a little more involved as I approached middle school, but that's also when things started to turn. One, I was becoming a teenager, which meant that I, of course, knew everything about everything, because every teenager does. As a current high school math teacher, I can vouch that that hasn't changed since I was a kid. However, there were a couple of things that struck me as I was beginning to drift apart from the church, what limited role I had in it before. One thing was I would read the Bible and I would take these interpretations of Jesus's words and I'd be like, oh, this is really cool. We should look out for each other. We shouldn't judge people based on all of these things, right? Again, race, class, the neighborhood they're from, the amount of money their parents had, things like that. So I took this very almost radical takeaway from the Bible when I was a young teen. But I found myself surrounded by, for lack of a better word, cranky old white guys who were using snippets from the Bible, from the Old Testament usually, as reasons we should dislike people, as reasons we should not accept a certain person. And to me, it was always, well, but Jesus is all about love thy neighbor as thyself. So even if they are the worst sinner, right, it's our duty as Christians to love them. So at this point, I was like, okay, it's not for me. Maybe I don't understand it. The one time as a teenager, I was like, maybe I'm wrong about this thing. I think I wasn't, but so many people around me had this other view that I felt like I couldn't do it anymore. So I took quite a bit of time off from the church, described myself as an atheist for a while. As I approached my early 20s, it drifted from atheism to agnosticism. And then I slowly started to kind of want that peace back. A major part of that was I met my wife, Carrie, who also teaches Sunday school here. And she had a lot more faith than I. I mean, at the point we met, I'd say to describe my faith as a mustard seed would be very generous, right? However, she and I fell in love, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll look into it. So we kind of shopped around for churches, did that whole thing, and I was still like, yeah, it's cool or whatever, but this is more for you than it is for me. That's when we stumbled across All Saints. Our very first sermon here, it was Pastor Sue, and she did a really dynamic sermon based kind of on the movie Dead Poets Society, which I thought was really cool. At any rate, that kind of got me more involved with the church. I still kind of wore the badge of agnosticism like it was cool or something. I don't know. But as I kind of participated in the church more, I realized that, maybe my interpretations aren't wrong. Maybe my interpretations, there's a grain of truth. There's a mustard seed of truth. And that kind of inspired me to then get involved with the Sunday school program, because I at least knew those stories, right? I was familiar with them. And as I did that, it kind of furthered my belief that Christ is meant to be a force for justice. It's meant to encourage us to act whenever we see injustice, to kind of balance the scales, as it were. Right? Because if we're supposed to behave as Christ would, Christ very much is about liberating the oppressed, feeding the hungry, things of that nature. So that right there is a large contributor to the growing faith I have had since finding All Saints, since kind of finding a church home. As time wears on, I don't get less, less disabused of this idea that Christ should be a force for justice. That if I am a Christian and I am not pursuing justice for justice's sake, that I am falling short somehow. So that is, again, as I said before, both something I learned from Sunday school and something that encourages me to continue to teach Sunday school. I feel like there's a lot of powerful stories, powerful ideas in the Bible that really could drive us forward, that if we followed them even a little bit, society would be much better. One of my favorite stories is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I was always drawn to the fact, even when I was younger, that, right, Jesus describes a priest. He describes what I would later learn is a Levite. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Right, and these people who are supposed to be the good guys, right? These people who are his audience, basically. And he describes them as not being, right, the good guys. And instead he picks a Samaritan. He picks somebody who the people of the time were not fans of. Martin Luther King Jr. went on to use the parable of the Good Samaritan, except replacing the Samaritan with a person of a different race, and all sorts of profound and powerful leaders with a calling towards justice have used this as kind of a, hey, right, we got to get our house in order. We gotta figure this out. And our neighbors are who our neighbors are. It's not a matter of they should be this or we want them to be this. It's, right, as we learn in the book of Matthew, right, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Right. And that's something, a theme that stuck with me as well, that once Jesus is on the scene, it seems to be the 10 commandments are still super important, but there's 2 commandments, right? Love the Lord God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and then love thy neighbor as thyself. All of the rest kind of fall in. All of the other 10 commandments fall into those 2. If you do those 2 things, you're doing it right. So hopefully this wasn't a boring 9 or so minutes. When I was asked to speak before, it was going to be on April 1st. And I was like, okay, well, guess it's just a joke. But I'm really glad for the opportunity. And I hope to continue growing my faith here at All Saints and sharing that with my family here and the Sunday school students. Thank you.